Well, the Big 12 Conference starts to see some separation in the basketball standings. I'm Pete Mundo, Heartland College Sports. He is Matthew Postins, our lead Big 12 basketball writer. Just 3 games left in the regular season. Can you believe it? This past week, Matthew, let's just spend some time on the week that was in the Big 12. There was off-court drama, Texas Tech fans going after UT, the flagrant 2, everything involving that fiasco. There was BYU coming back to upset Kansas. There's just a lot of things that continues to me prove that this is the most compelling basketball conference in the country right now, and it's not even close. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, Texas Tech. Let's not forget Texas Tech got drilled in that game by Texas.
Yeah.
Correct? I mean,
yeah,
all that drama and you lose by 15, 20 points on your home floor to a team that you think is your rival, but a team that really doesn't think you're anything at all to them. I mean, you're certainly not Oklahoma or Texas A&M to them. And, BYU, that was a big win for them. I think that's like the biggest takeaway for this midweek is just, BYU going into Allen Fieldhouse and winning a game there was not on my bingo card. I mean, Kansas is a team right now that they'll lose a game at home now once a year. They lost to TCU last year. They lost a game at home the year before that. But, a team like BYU that, to my knowledge, hasn't played in that environment and probably hasn't played in that environment in a long time, to go in there and win that game, albeit with Kansas obviously being shorthanded. To me, that's a huge win for them. It really cements BYU as a tournament team and I think shows that they can be a player in the tournament once we get to March Madness.
Yeah, BYU went to Allen Fieldhouse, won a game there for the first time since 1971.
There we go.
Beat Kansas for the first time since 1960. So, I mean, these are just crazy numbers. I'm watching that game, and Mark Pope gets a technical foul with about 8 minutes left. And at that point, they had chipped away at the KU lead, which was as much as 12 points in that second half. They're down by 6 at that point. And BYU closed the game hitting 4 straight three-pointers, which really sealed that victory for them. And to do that on the road in that environment, I mean, that Allen Fieldhouse crowd was just stunned. They had won 19 straight at home. And, you're up 12 points in the second half at home in that environment against BYU. It's not a knock on BYU, but no one thinks, Matthew, BYU is making that comeback. And there was like a 30-point differential in 3-point points, literally 3-point points that were made. And that's something as well that's, hurt Kansas and could bite them come March. A hot team gets them in that 3-point percentage, and they're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, and that's why BYU can be so troublesome to teams in the tournament because of that ability to shoot. I think you and I talked earlier in the year about, when they're shooting 39, 40% from 3, they're winning. When they're shooting 33, 34%, they're losing. There's a very clear margin between when they shoot well from 3 and a correlation to winning the game. And, to go into a place like that, you've got to be tough. So, when Mark Pope gets that technical foul, you can go one of 2 different ways. You can either just go straight into the tank, this just isn't our night, or you can find a way to fight through it. And BYU found a way to fight through it. And the fact that they hit those clutch threes down the stretch, I think really shows you how tough this team is. They've been a really tough team to deal with at home all year. But this is like the second time I've seen them show a lot of toughness on the road. And this is going to be the kind of win that helps them when they go to Kansas City. It's the kind of win that's going to help them when they go to the NCAA tournament. I mean, any Big 12 team to me that makes the tournament now, they're a potential second weekend team. They've got the ability to get there. Even Kansas can get hot in the first weekend and get to the second weekend. But you're starting to look at, 7 teams above 500 in this conference, 7 teams below 500 in this conference. There's a clear line of demarcation, I think, right now between the really good teams and I don't want to say really bad teams, but the teams that aren't measuring up.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Every Big 12 team and every Big 12 fan base that makes the tournament is going to think we're a Sweet 16 team. Now, it's going to be tough. If you get an 8 seed, you got to play a 1 seed in the second round. Yeah. But still, they're all going to say, why not us? Because as one of our viewers right now on YouTube, Glenn notes, March Madness is going to be total madness this year. And I think that's true, Matthew. I think you look around the country. I mean, I believe Houston's one of the top 3-4 teams in the country. But as we continue to get more parity in this sport, the transfer portal is helping that tremendously. We know what happened last year. Another 16 beat a 1. Like, I don't think that's out of the question in any case this year. I just think that it's going to get even crazier come the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, it's really more than ever. It's about being that team that kind of has the hot hand going into the tournament. You need to have all your horses together, so to speak, when you get to March Madness. And to your point about being an 8 seed, but we saw TCU as a 8 or 9 seed 2 years ago win their first round game and nearly beat Arizona. You could make the argument that TCU probably should have beaten Arizona in a second round game. That Arizona maybe got a little bit of help there at the end of the game. So even a 10, 11 Big 12 seed is going to have an opportunity to get to the second weekend of this tournament. Some of that's about the depth and talent in this conference. Some of that is about the fact that there really isn't a dominant team or a dominant group of teams that I think are going to really kind of make their case to be national champions. It's going to be a pretty wide swath of teams.
It is. Now, you look at the Big 12 standings right now, it's either Houston or it's Iowa State. Houston's got a 1-game lead in Iowa State, and then KU and Baylor are 3 games back. So with 3 games to play, they're effectively out of the mix. Houston's schedule at Oklahoma on Saturday, at UCF next week, and then home to Kansas next Saturday. And Iowa State is at UCF, home to BYU, at Kansas State. Right out of the gates, my gut tells me Houston has the tougher stretch here. 2 road games back-to-back at Oklahoma, at UCF can be tricky. Road games are always tricky in the Big 12. And then you got to welcome in Kansas to end the season. Now, we don't know where Kansas is going to be, where Kevin McCullough is going to be at that point. Will he be back? Will he be playing? That's been a strange situation, to say the least. But, I'd probably rather have Iowa State's draw here at UCF. Then you get BYU at home. You'd rather have them there than on the road.
Absolutely.
And then you go to K-State, although K-State, that could be a game where K-State looks at and says a win gets us into the NCAA tournament. So I don't know. What about you? Which schedule would you want?
I think Iowa State's is probably a little more forgiving. UCF's not an easy place to play, as we've learned this season for Houston. I thought Houston did a nice job taking care of Cincinnati the other night. That's a team that they've had trouble with previously in the American Athletic Conference. I felt like that was a good win for them to not, kind of take a step back and let a team that is really kind of, scratching and fighting and trying to get into the NCAA tournament to reach up and upset them. But 2 straight road games. Oklahoma's fighting for seeding. Kansas is going to be fighting perhaps for a double bye in the Big 12 tournament. So I think Houston's road's going to be a little bit tougher if they want to win the conference.
Yeah. So, and if you're Houston, you got to figure, hey, we got to win these 3 games because you got to figure Iowa State, which will be favored in their 3 games, will go 3-0 over that stretch. Not guaranteed by any stretch, but you got to assume that. So that's where things are kind of at right now in the Big 12. Before we get to this weekend, Matthew, I do want to ask you about some of the allegations that have been tossed out there. I know Clemson's coach brought this up. It's gotten a lot of attention. It's being brought up right now on our YouTube live. Edwin says the Big 12 is not gaming the net system. What do you make of the allegations? The Big 12 is gaining the net system to try to improve its status as the top conference in college basketball.
Look, everybody's gaming the system. Everybody builds their schedule the same way. You play anywhere from 3 to 5 teams that are going to challenge you. Kansas probably plays 1 or 2 more than, say, Cincinnati, just because of who Kansas is. You play 2 or 3 games at an off-site tournament where you might end up playing like a high major if you get to the championship game. And then the rest of your games are at home against mid-major or low-major teams. We can slice and dice Iowa State's net of their opponents in non-conference, and we could do the same to Houston, and we could do the same to some of the other teams that, in their non-conference schedule. But the reality is everybody builds their schedule the same way because they know they're going to play 18 to 20 games in their conference against high major opponents. And they know that's going to do some damage to their net. I mean, Cincinnati's net has been pretty stable, but if they had played a more difficult non-conference and lost a few of those games, their net would be lower than it is right now. I feel like that's just, I saw that and I was like, you know what? Sour grapes. And here's a guy who has a team that has a net of like 23. You're telling me Clemson played a tougher schedule than half the Big 12 in non-conference? I haven't looked at their schedule yet, but I sincerely doubt it.
Yeah, I sincerely doubt it as well. But for the Big 12, this is good. When you're getting attacked, that's usually a good thing. That means people are jealous. That means they're coming after you. And if you're the Big 12, if you're Brett Yormark, you kind of want to be in that position. You would rather be the conference getting talked about, getting shot at, so to speak, than the one doing the shooting.
Yeah, and you think about the Big East back in the 80s. They took a lot of shots when they rose up because they rose up fast. And Georgetown's winning national championships and Villanova's doing the same. And, I think all but one of their teams in the first 10 or 12 years of that conference got to a national championship game. And they took a lot of shots from the SEC and the ACC because they were kind of the party crashers. And they played a really physical style of basketball. And some folks in those conferences didn't like that. And back then, we didn't have a lot of these analytic tools to lean on to tell us who the best teams were in the conference. It was, decided on the court. So, if I'm in Brett Yormark's position, I'm absolutely happy with the fact that I'm taking shots from other coaches and from other conferences, because that tells me, A, my teams are successful, and B, everybody's watching.
Absolutely. Matthew Postins is joining us on Heartland College Sports. I'm Pete Mundo. He's, of course, our lead Big 12 basketball writer. Always appreciate him being on the show. And you as well, hit that thumbs up on YouTube if you're joining us there. Or, of course, on the podcast, leave that 5-star rating and review. Okay, Matthew, when you look around this league, Kansas State feels like the real bubble team right now. Cincinnati has faded. UCF has faded. Cincinnati's kind of that team that we're still keeping, or excuse me, Kansas State's that team we're keeping a close eye on right now. They've got Cincinnati this weekend, and it's really become a must-win game. They have 3 games left at Cincinnati, at KU, home to Iowa State. I think 2-1 over that stretch, and Kansas State should be in. What about you?
I think that's going to help them a great deal. Right now, I think they're 7 or 8. I think they're part of that next 4 out in bracketology at ESPN. Yeah. They cannot lose to Cincinnati. They cannot lose that game. They must win that game. Kansas, as shorthanded as Kansas is, that's going to be a really interesting game in Allen next week. And I have a hard time seeing them beating Iowa State at home, just because Iowa State's undefeated at home. And they seem almost impervious at home, kind of like Houston. So, if they can find a way to scrape 2 wins, that gets them to 19 going into the Big 12 tournament. They're sitting there at, 9-9. They're probably playing in that first set of games on Wednesday. They win one there, they get to 20. If you can be at 20 wins, when you come out of the tournament, regardless of where you finish in the Big 12 tournament, that's going to give you a shot, at this point. And I think with the overall net of the conference, their overall schedule, and everything else, that gives them a good shot at getting in.
Well, now, and just to be clear, because I know someone's going to bring it up, the Iowa State K-State game is in Manhattan.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well,
it's
then
home.
Okay.
And I think that may change the equation a little bit, but I just feel like if they can split those 2 games, assuming they get by Cincinnati this weekend, they've got themselves in a very good spot. And you're right, maybe you got to pick off one more in the tournament to get to 20. But, if you close the season with at least one top 10 win, when you've already got a couple of top 25 wins, you've already beaten KU, man, Jerome Tang, they may end up closing pretty strong. I'm not sure if I take them to go anywhere in March, because they just are kind of a roller coaster team. I don't know what I'm getting night in, night out. But you know what? Jerome Tang in March, in crunch time, in overtime, you know what good he is there. I'm not going to bet against him either.
No, I wouldn't bet against them at this point. If magically they could win all 3 of those games, that would give them 20 wins going into Kansas City. All the data that I've collected over the past 6 or 7 full seasons suggests that if you get to 20 wins before you get to your conference tournament, you're going to some sort of postseason. And usually about 65%, 70% of the time, you're going to the NCAA tournament. So, 2-1, I think, really helps them. 3-0, I think, almost makes them a lock to get in.
Yes. Oh, it got to be a lock if they go 3-0. No doubt about it. So you look at this weekend slate. Kansas is at Baylor. That's really the premier game in the conference this weekend. That's a noon Central tip on ABC. Now, neither of these teams are going to win the Big 12, but I feel like they're important for seeding. Kansas coming off that loss earlier in the week. I think this game between KU and Baylor is really about when it comes to postseason positioning and things like that.
Yeah, this is a game the committee can look at, late in the season and say, where are you at as a team? I mean, they look at analytics and they look at a lot of different data, but they're also looking at where you are in your last 10 games. They're looking at injuries. So they could definitely look at the result of this game and make some decisions about whether Kansas should be a 2 or a 3, or Baylor should be a 2 or a 3. And you mentioned Big 12 seeding. The loser of this game could potentially be tied with Texas Tech, BYU, or TCU, depending upon what happens on Saturday. If you're thinking about trying to get to those 4 double byes, and we talked about this last week, in the context of Kansas needing some rest, Houston's basically a lock at this point. Iowa State's just about a lock at this point. Kansas, Baylor, Texas Tech, BYU, TCU, they can all make a case to get one of those 2 double byes, depending upon what happens over the last 3 games. So if you're Kansas or Baylor, you're going to the tournament, but the ability to get an extra day of rest at the Big 12 tournament, this is a game, if you win it, that's going to really enhance your case to be able to do that.
Great point. I mean, TCU, BYU this weekend in Provo, that's a late game on Saturday on ESPN Plus. They're both 8-7 in league play. That game could go a long way to determining which one of those 2 teams, if either, ends up getting the double bye, because they'll be tied in record. The winner of that game will be tied in record with the loser of the KU Baylor game.
Yeah, absolutely. And, along with the 4 double byes, there are byes for the 5th and the 6th seed. It's just a single bye. They skip the Tuesday and they go into the Wednesday, kind of like with the old 10-team format when you had the 7 through 10 teams play, and those 1 and 2 would get kind of a bye out of that. So there are single byes to be had for the 5th and 6th seed. So, when you look at this group of 7 teams that are over 500 right now in the conference, that's basically the pool that those 6, byes, whether they be single byes or double byes, are going to come from, unless somebody like a Kansas State comes surging from the back. But that's your group. And any game they play right now, if you're thinking about seeding for the Big 12 tournament, you don't want to be the 7, because if you're the 7, you got to play Wednesday, and you're probably going to play like a Kansas State or a Texas, somebody who's really tough and might be on a tear at that point.
Yeah, you look at this league, almost half the conference, 6 of the 14 teams are 8-7 or 7-8 in league play going into Saturday. And I didn't have that in my mind until I just looked at it here. And I'm like, gosh, you almost got half the conference that is sitting directly in the middle of the pack, which goes to show you the depth of this league, but also how much these next 3 games actually matter for what you're talking about: rest, positioning for the Big 12 tournament, and then seeding and positioning for the NCAA tournament. So these games, they're going to play a big role coming up on Saturday and next week as well.
Yeah, I mean, think about Kansas City. I'm going to be there, obviously, for the women and the men, but the first 2 men's games are Tuesday afternoon. That's your 11, 14, and 12, 13 games. That's 2 days, 3 days after they've played their Saturday games. And then they come back and they've got 4 games on Wednesday, 4 games on Thursday. So would you rather play Wednesday or would you rather play Thursday? That's why I really feel like you're going to see some of these, or all of these teams, really play their guts out the next 3 games, because they know there's a significant difference for them between playing Wednesday and playing Thursday, just in terms of giving yourself an extra game of rest or an extra day of rest to get ready for what's going to be, I think perhaps the best Big 12 tournament I've been to, and quite possibly the best conference tournament this year.
Yeah. All right. When you look at teams at the bottom of the standings, I just want to get a quick refresher from you on this. Josh Eilert, I think we both agree, not getting the job.
Yeah.
Mike Boynton, we both agreed as of last week, is going to get another year.
Yeah.
But then I see, I see Oklahoma State, and I see the way that fan base, I mean, there was nobody there on Wednesday night against UCF. They lose that game at home. They've got 3 games left: at Texas, home to Tech, at BYU. I still lean to him getting another year, Matthew, but gosh, when you see Gallagher-Iba as dead as that place was on Wednesday and they lose to UCF, it at least makes me wonder and at least think about the conversation once again in my head. What about you here in the next minute or so?
I think it's going to be a hard conversation after the season between him and Chad Weiberg, the athletic director, who is now on the NCAA tournament committee for the next several years, starting in September. I still lean toward him coming back, but I think it's worth understanding that he's probably not going to make a decision about the job right away. In other words, it's not going to be like Bruce Weber a couple of years ago where he resigned the day after the tournament. I think it's going to be a difficult conversation between the two of them. And I think Chad Weiberg's going to wait and see what these players do. Do some of them put themselves in the transfer portal? Do some of them decide to go to a different place? If he can keep this young core of players together, I really think they can grow together and become something very good next year. But if some of those guys start splintering off, that potentially could be a signal to Weiberg that he needs to make a change at coach, because these days when you make a head coaching change, you basically expect most of your roster to go away because they have that option. So if you fire Mike Boynton or you let him go, number one, it's a $9 million option if you do it, or a $9 million buyout if you do it before April 1. It's $8 million after that. Number two, you're basically rebuilding. I mean, you're starting from scratch because whoever the new coach is probably isn't going to keep most of those guys, because many of the guys that Boynton has recruited over the last 2 years have been 4- and 5-star players. So it's a tough decision. I think it'll be a tough conversation, but in my gut, I still believe he gets one more year.
We'll be watching. We'll be following. He's Matthew Postins. Heartland College Sports is where you find us covering the Big 12 Conference each and every day. Great job, my man. Thanks for being here.
You bet. Appreciate it, Pete.
All right. If you're on the show right now and you haven't yet, hit a thumbs up on the video on YouTube. Leave a 5-star rating and review on the podcast. We appreciate you guys doing that and being a part of the show. And we'll be talking to you soon. Big 12 tournament is right around the corner. Go Big 12.